we'll be looking at early intervention and how this can prevent or minimise conflict. We will consider how informal resolution approaches can potentially diffuse volatile situations. We will also look at techniques and skills that can be used in a conflict situation. And finally, today, we're going to look at what happens if conflict does go down the formal route and how the Labour Relations Agency can help. So working together isn't always easy, as I'm sure we all know. Conflict exists in the workplace when people feel that their needs and certain expectations at work are not being met. It's very much part of organisational life, and it's an inevitable occurrence at work. Our actions, our reactions and interactions determine whether the conflict remains constructive or whether it becomes destructive. It can often start as small upsets and build and grow to workplace battles, and it can be triggered by many things. If it is dealt with in a reactive, ad hoc way, then the focus will be on handling individual disputes as they occur, rather than working on developing an organisational approach that promotes early and collaborative ways to resolve conflict. At Labour Relations, we would encourage both employers and employees, and indeed yourselves as their trade union representatives, to make the most of the potential of early dispute resolution approaches to help settle disputes. A workplace that promotes open discussion and collaborative approaches to resolving conflict will be one that can continue to grow and foster a culture of positive employee relations. So what's the causes of workplace conflict? It can be hard to attribute conflict to one specific issue, and often there will be more than one issue at play. There can also be underlying tensions between people that seem to merge into one particular issue or incident, but in reality, the issues can run much deeper and are not articulated or dealt with as part of the conflict. So the first one is a communication breakdown. In the majority of mediations that we have facilitated at Labour Relations, this has been the most common cause of workplace conflict. If information is not communicated effectively, it can be misinterpreted or misunderstood, allowing annoyance and frustration to build. Communication styles can be different amongst staff, depending on which style they prefer, which can in itself cause difficulties. Some people may prefer face-to-face, some prefer email. Some employees may prefer to have the bare minimum of communication and thus avoid having to communicate as much as possible. This non-responsive approach can be a source of conflict if people feel they're being ignored. Communication is very important if an organisation is going through change, which can be another source of conflict if it's mismanaged. Then you've got the one that I'm sure you're familiar with, the clash of egos. Conflict can exist through differences in personality styles or ways of working. Personal differences are the fundamental causes of interpersonal conflict in an organisation and can create conflict among people because it affects the emotions of individuals. Then we've got unclear objectives, which can cause conflict. When employees do not understand their tasks or their role and responsibility, conflicts can arise. Due to this, they may not complete their tasks as their manager or colleagues expected from them. Then you've got lack of trust. This is one of the causes of conflict in an organisation. All individuals in a group must have mutual trust to achieve common goals. Lack of mutual trust among group members creates conflict. It creates barriers to achieving goals. It can cause insecurity and fear. And indecisiveness can also be a cause of conflict. Indecisions can slow things down and cause impatience and frustration in others. Frustrations can lead to conflict due to a clear lack of accountability or responsibility, poor decisions being made with no explanation or rationale provided. And the line manager can also be a cause of conflict. Again, I'm sure some of you are aware of that. The line management style or approach, as I say, can be the reason of the conflict. A CIPD report, which surveyed more than 2,000 employers and staff about their experience of conflict at work over the last 3 years, revealed that line managers were either a source of conflict or made conflict worse. So I'm sure as trade union representatives, you can relate to all these conflict causes I've just mentioned, and no doubt you have seen them at play in cases that you've been involved in previously. And then this slide now outlines some of the obvious and less obvious signs of conflict. It's important to pay attention to these more.
Rosemary, just real quick. Karen, you're not sharing screen at the minute, so we can't see any presentation.
Okay. Thanks, Tony.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, we're on signs of conflict, and if you just change your display settings, because at the minute we can see your notes.
Okay, bear with me.
That's us.
Thank you, Tony. Have none of the slides shown up until now?
No, but everyone will enjoy them because they've already had them sent out, and they'll get the lovely video after.
Thank you, Tony. Apologies, everybody.
Is that okay?
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah. Okay. Well, hopefully they've just had to listen rather than have the visuals. Apologies, everybody. So this slide outlines some of the obvious and less obvious signs of conflict. It's important to pay attention to these warning signs in the workplace in order to deal with the conflict at as early a stage as possible. So some of the obvious signs, it's obviously quite self-explanatory. You've got aggression and shouting, anger, gossip, people being visibly upset, backstabbing, silent treatment, withdrawn, and obviously it's quite obvious if somebody starts litigation that there's conflict. But some of the less obvious signs are unproductivity, unexplained resignations, increased absenteeism, team dysfunction, ill health, increased grievances, and actually presenteeism, which can be a general symptom of employee insecurity. So the next slide shows an Impasse report on findings on the financial cost of conflict in the UK. And this research was co-authored by the University of Sheffield. And as you can see, the figures are stark. So I'm just going to look through them there. So you can see the first one, it said that 9.7 million employees experienced conflict, or 60% of them suffered depression as a result. The average cost of conflict is £3,000 per employee. The cost of management time is 282 million per year. The cost of legal fees is 264 million per year. And the cost of compensation to employees awarded through tribunals or out-of-court settlements is 225 million per year. So you can see there that the costs, as I say, they're very stark. So handling formal and informal complaints associated with workplace conflict, legal processes, sickness absence and resignations can, as the slide shows, cost £3,000 per year per person involved in the conflict. Most of the costs connected with conflict arise towards the end of the employment cycle, so that's whether this be resignation or dismissal. These figures account for the costs of managing any workplace dispute, including formal and informal and formal disputes, along with obviously your defensive legal claims and the costs incurred from sickness absence and resignations caused by conflict at work. The findings showed the average cost of conflicts where employees did not engage with their managers, HR, or their union representatives were higher than where discussions took place. So this serves to highlight the valuable role an effective trade union representative can add to the process and play in the resolution of conflict. So the next one then is, how do you respond to conflict? We all have a natural way that we respond to conflict. Thomas and Kilman's conflict model is a powerful way of looking at your conflict management style. Conflicts are painful for individuals. Different people respond differently to conflicts. Thomas and Kilman studied how people manage conflicts. They observed that most people use one of the 5 approaches to resolving interpersonal conflicts. Each approach varies in 2 ways: the level of assertiveness and the level of cooperation. The level of assertiveness a conflict handling style has represents how interested in your own interests you are. Cooperation, on the other hand, represents how well someone with a certain conflict handling style is concerned with others' interests. Each strategy has its own benefits, and there's no right or wrong conflict management style. It's good to know how you instinctively or how one of your colleagues or employees responds to conflict, as well as having an awareness of other conflict management styles, as they may help how you typically approach specific situations. So I'm just going to talk through the 5 different styles now, but I'd be keen for you to think about which one describes best your response to conflict. So the first one that we have is the competing conflict handling approach. So if this is you, you will take a firm stand and you know what you want. You will usually operate from a position of power, drawn from things like position, rank, expertise, or persuasive ability. This style can be useful when there's an emergency and a decision needs to be made fast, when the decision is unpopular, or when defending against someone who is trying to exploit the situation selfishly. Compete is a useful strategy when the outcome is extremely important and immediate decision needs to be taken. So compete is appropriate when you know you're right, time is short and a quick decision is needed, or you need to stand up for your rights. The second approach is the avoiding conflict handling approach. You will evade the conflict entirely. This style is typified by delegating controversial decisions, accepting default decisions, and not wanting to hurt anyone's feelings. It can be appropriate when victory is impossible, when the controversy is trivial, or when someone else is in a better position to solve the problem. However, in many situations, this is a weak and ineffective approach to take. Then the next approach is the collaborating conflict handling approach. Again, if this is you, you will try to meet the needs of all people involved. You will be highly assertive, but unlike the competitor, you will cooperate effectively and acknowledge that everyone is important. This style is useful when you need to bring together a variety of viewpoints to get the best solution, when there have been previous conflicts in the group, or when the situation is too important for a simple trade-off. The accommodating conflict handling approach. Again, you will indicate a willingness to meet the needs of others at the expense of your own needs. The accommodator often knows when to give in to others, but can be persuaded to surrender a position even when it's not warranted. You may not be an assertive person, but you're highly cooperative. Accommodation is appropriate when the issues matter more to the other party, or when peace is more valuable than winning. And the final approach is a compromising conflict handling approach. People who prefer a compromising style try to find a solution that will at least partially satisfy everyone. You will feel that everyone is expected to give up something, and you yourself will also relinquish something. Compromise is useful when the cost of conflict is higher than the cost of losing ground, when equal strength opponents are at a standstill, and when there's a deadline looming. The real benefit of the Thomas Kilman model is that once you know the different styles, you can identify them in the people with whom you are in conflict, and this can help you to understand their perspective and frame the response. By knowing the styles and how to use them effectively, you can begin to take charge of those uncomfortable conflict situations. All right. So the next slide then is looking at, can conflict ever be good? So conflict's not automatically a bad thing. Constructive processing of differences can produce high quality decisions. It can encourage growth and it can strengthen groups and individuals. Some characteristics of constructive conflict include disagreeing in order to find the best solution, building cooperation among people through learning more about each other, allowing reasonable expression of emotions, which releases anxiety and stress. And these approaches can lead to a win-win resolution and develop common goals. Again, as trade union representatives, I'm sure you can identify with positive conflict. I've no doubt that many of you have been involved in meetings and negotiations that involve the expressing of lots of different points of views. An agreement was reached through compromise and cooperation and focus on the common goals. So prevention is better than cure, as we know that old saying. So conflict is likely to fester and intensify if it is ignored. As a trade union representative, you will find it invaluable to develop the skills and confidence to intervene at an early stage to nip disagreements in the bud before they escalate. Reflecting on your own style and learning how to handle conflict in a proactive and positive way will be key to this. In any workplace, a line manager plays an important role in preventing serious conflict from occurring in the first place. And we've seen that earlier when we were looking at the Impasse study. Some of you, alongside your trade union role, may also be in a line management position in the workplace. So the next few slides focuses on the line manager role. And we just thought it important to include it in today's seminar. So hopefully you'll find it useful, either from the position as a line manager or as a trade union representative, helping you to understand the value of an effective line manager. So the first thing an effective line manager can do is get to know the team better. By getting to know the people in the team as individuals and building and sustaining relationships with each team member, they will be better placed to foster good working relationships with them, to anticipate any potential conflict within the team, to understand any personal pressures which might be affecting the employee at work, to talk frankly about any problems they might be experiencing with their colleagues or the job itself. The line manager should also be aware of simmering tensions. People deal with relationships and conflicts in different ways. Some show their annoyance, while others, who appear laid back and tolerant on the surface, may find themselves becoming progressively annoyed with a colleague, manager, or problem until they lose their temper, often over a minor issue proven to be the last straw. I'm sure we've probably all seen that at some point or another. It's important that to build and sustain relationships within the workplace, managers take responsibility and hone their capacity to handle conflict and people management issues so that they are aware of problems early and know what to do if simmering tensions start to appear. A line manager also needs to acknowledge when a team member is causing stress to others and deal with the issue. Managers need to set the rules around team conduct. They have a responsibility to role model appropriate behaviours and standards in the workplace. They need to ensure the policies and procedures are consistent and unambiguous and clearly spell out what standard of behaviour is expected in the workplace and what is not tolerated. They should foster a culture of positive behaviours that all employees should follow in terms of how they interact with each other, their customers, clients, and the public. Again, as a trade union representative, you have a role to play in modelling the standards required, challenging both management and members when standards of behaviour are not adhered to or policies or procedures are not followed. And a really important one is obviously not to get involved in office gossip or politics. We appreciate that a certain level of office gossip is inevitable, and that in itself does not necessarily cause problems. But office politics can often be a source of misunderstanding and tension. It's important that all employees are encouraged to be mindful of their conversation topics, mindful of the views and opinions of others, and understand how idle gossip can easily cause offence and create tensions. That's why it's a good idea to have a robust equality and diversity policy and ensure all staff are both aware of it and are regularly trained and refresher trained in this area. And we also recognise that trade union representatives can be a valuable resource in helping to resolve workplace conflicts. They have a key role to play in supporting and representing their members individually or collectively in conflict situations, such as being aware of company policies and procedures, providing advice and support for informal and formal grievances, and disciplinaries, redundancy situations, and collective bargaining purposes, etc. Trade union representatives can also play a significant role by being aware of what alternative dispute resolution options are available and promoting the benefits of these. So that actually concludes my part of today's session, and I'm going to hand you over to Karen now, who'll take you through the remainder of the session. So thanks for your time, everybody.
Thanks, Rosemary. Okay, so early intervention. Why intervene early? So despite the preventative measures that we've explored previously, conflict can still develop. And if it does, action will need to be taken to resolve it early and informally. We know early resolution is best, yet we often brush low-level conflict and festering relationships under the carpet, hoping that they'll go away. And avoiding conflict is a natural response, but there are times we must bite the bullet and address conflict constructively and as early as possible. These conversations can be unpleasant or nerve-wracking, but they don't have to be difficult. The key thing is you have the conversation in the first place, and the earlier you can do that, the easier it will be. There is a crucial time to intervene. This is before conflict reaches formal workplace procedures. Any costs that arise in the early stages of conflict are low by comparison to costs connected with the end of the employment cycle, and only start to rise if employees carry on working while ill or take time off due to sickness. And the ACAS study that Rosemary referred to earlier found that where conflict resulted in formal procedures, costs were more than 3 times those associated with informal resolution. Why do we avoid conflict? Perhaps the leadership team is disconnected from the reality of what it's really like to work in the business, and they aren't aware of the disputes that are bubbling beneath the surface, stealing management time and affecting productivity. It can just feel too difficult. There can be a reluctance within organisations to scratch too deep beneath the surface for fear of what they might find. Conflict management is often not a strategic priority. Leadership fail to treat conflict as a strategic priority and to put the necessary steps in place to prevent and resolve it. Organisations need to make the effort to understand the nature, extent and impact of workplace conflict to develop meaningful strategies or deal with it and make the business case for any HR or learning and development interventions that may be needed to tackle it. Businesses and organisations should consider their informal approaches and have a strategy in place to try and resolve problems. Encouragement with trade unions and employees should be encouraged, and a culture should be nurtured to allow people to feel that they can raise any issues they may face in their working day and that they will be dealt with quickly and fairly. And then the desire to be liked. The desire to be liked and not thought of badly can be so strong as to paralyze thinking and stop somebody from expressing dissenting opinions. Even when a workplace does implement good policies and procedures and promotes preventative measures, conflict can, of course, still develop and often, unfortunately, does. As trade union representatives, you will need to work with the relevant members and management and encourage action if it is to be resolved early and informally. All parties, employee, management, unions, should be aware of the dispute resolution options available as an alternative to lodging formal grievances. Remember that once a formal procedure is triggered, positions become more entrenched and behaviour more adversarial. It is then more difficult to move people to a mutually acceptable solution. This slide will detail some techniques that you can use if you are facilitating a heated discussion or a conflict situation between two parties. And you may find some of these particularly useful in your trade union role. Questions to ask. Think about the questions you're going to ask. One of the keys to conflict resolution and good communication in general is developing the ability to ask questions. The right questions move the discussion forward and improve the quality of information you receive. Ask the right questions to gather information using open, closed, or probing, challenging questions. Can you explain what happened? How did the problem begin? How did you respond? What would you like to see happen? What would it take to be able to move this forward? What are the obstacles? What does a person want or need? Try and get them to move their focus from what has gone wrong to what do they need to rectify the problem. And you can do this by asking them, what do you want or what do you need to sort this out? Active listening, really listen to what they are saying, focus your attention on them, use non-verbal cues, paraphrase what they have said to show that you have understood. And this can avoid misunderstanding and it helps people to open up more. Make sure both sides have an opportunity to tell their turn of events. Let each side tell their story and don't try to direct it. The risk is not what you need to know, it's what they want to say. So consider the details of what is being said and the impact the disagreement has had on them, and try and establish what their needs are or to get to a resolution. Empathy can build trust. It works because it acknowledges people's feelings. Try and put yourself in their shoes, acknowledge their feelings and try and see things from their point of view. Allow the silence. Our instinct can be to fill in the silence when there's a gap in the conversation, especially if that silence is awkward or difficult. In conflict resolution, the silence allows a chance for the colleagues to reflect and consider their responses. So don't feel the need to fill in awkward silences when dealing with a topic that doesn't necessarily have an easy answer. And then reframing. This is a technique to reword or restate what the person has said in a more constructive way. And it has been referred to as a conflict resolver's superpower. It's a useful tool for dead-end statements. Reframing a statement can redirect the conversation from a fixation on the negative to reveal what the person does want. So an example of this, if somebody says, he never listens to me and he always ignores the points I made, a reframe of that could be, so you believe the points that you raise are not being taken up and you would appreciate being heard and responded to. This reframe kind of neutralizes the comment and it starts to focus on the need. Impasse is a point at which parties to a conflict believe they can take no further action. They are in essence gridlocked, and I've no doubt as trade union representatives this is something you'll have come across in the past. It is important to anticipate impasse and the strategies you will use to try and overcome it. Impasse can present with blanket statements, refusal to show empathy, and strong emotional reactions. So think about the types of emotional responses that may present: anger, defensiveness, passive-aggressive, tears, sulky, sarcasm, or just blanking. And some tips for getting negotiations moving again. May be opportune just to take a break. Often things have a way of looking different when you return. Ask the parties, why do they appear to be at an impasse? Sometimes they need to feel and focus consciously on their deadlock. Ask the parties, what do you think we should do to move forward, to actively share the burden of the impasse? And ask parties if they agree to set the issue aside temporarily and go on to something else. Use reality checking. What do you think will happen if we don't get this resolved? Sometimes informal procedures just won't work, and it's necessary to use formal procedures to address unresolved conflict when, for example, maybe an allegation of serious harassment occurs. If a complaint is serious or the individual wants to have it investigated formally, they should have the right to pursue a grievance. Where serious incidents occur, such as alleged harassment or discrimination, persistent bullying, or out-of-character outbursts of verbal abuse or physical intimidation, they must be dealt with and taken seriously. So avoid shying away from using the formal routes in those cases where the situation warrants it. One of the most important assessments you'll need to make as a trade union representative is to recognise the point at which informal approaches to dispute resolution have failed and formal procedures need to be invoked. So this slide looks at individual conflict and starting from a minor problem through to a major problem, and it outlines the remedy options available to managers and trade unions. So, for example, a one-off disagreement, a personality clash, the remedy may be for the manager to have a quiet word. If it's an ongoing and more persistent problem, there may be clear signs of rivalry, resentment, stress, or unhappiness. Again, manager to discuss informally with the individual and deal with any underlying causes, or start to consider maybe the option of mediation. A formal grievance is lodged by one employee against another, then it's starting to come into the formal process, and therefore you would refer to your internal procedures. And then if a tribunal claim is lodged, then the LRA can help with conciliation or arbitration before it would get to a tribunal hearing. With group conflict, we again just consider this from a minor to a major, and the different types of conflicts and the remedy. So and looking at kind of joint consultative committees to help employees in making decisions, and again following dispute resolution procedures, and then maybe getting LRA involvement to prevent any sort of industrial action. This triangle represents the different stages of moving from informal to formal remedies. A key objective of the LRA is to work with employers, employees, and trade unions to promote and maintain good employment relations and help prevent workplace disputes. This clearly highlights, as was said, that conflict is best dealt with at source and at the earliest opportunity. This is why it's key to build good relationships with trade unions and involve them at the earliest opportunity. So in relation to these dispute resolution options, the trade union representatives can be involved at each stage, and we'll just take a moment now to go through those. So maintaining good employment relations. Trade union representatives can help promote equal opportunities at work, provide education and training sessions delivered through learning representatives who raise awareness of their employment rights and best practice. Internal processes or procedures using the formal and informal routes to resolution. So the informal route would be for trade unions being a sounding board for members' queries, concerns and complaints, providing advice, support and guidance to try and resolve at the informal stage. And then the formal route would be providing representation to members, support and advice, providing members with multiple ways to access resources, HR, mediation, and signposting workers to trade union legal advice. The external processes then maybe look at the involvement of the likes of the LRA in terms of maybe mediation referrals or non-ETs, employer-led early conciliation, which I'm going to discuss in a minute, and providing representation, support and advice. And then the top one being the legal remedy. So again, signposting workers or members to trade union legal advice, providing representation in tribunal hearings and settlement discussions. So how can the Labour Relations Agency help? There's a few features here that we offer in terms of dispute resolution. So I'll just go through these and provide some information on them. The first one, mediation. Mediation can be effective when a working relationship has broken down and the will to restore the relationship exists. So an impartial mediator from the LRA will help parties to listen, understand and identify conflict or dispute issues and assist them to reach a mutually acceptable solution. It's not a legally binding process, but it requires the participants to volunteer in the mediation session and ultimately to commit to improving relationships. If mediation is unsuccessful, other formal recourse is still available to the parties. Mediation is a confidential process and any disclosures made during negotiations remain completely confidential and cannot be used in any other process. such as grievance, discipline. A trade union representative can accompany an employee at the mediation. However, this would be in a supportive role and they cannot answer on the participant's behalf. They can be present in the joint meeting room or alternatively in the individual's personal room that they get, but they would be required to sign the confidentiality agreement, and approval would have to be given by the other employee involved in the mediation. Conciliation then, there's three types of conciliation. So the first one is now early conciliation. So anyone who wishes to lodge a claim at the Industrial or Fair Employment Tribunal must first of all notify the LRA and consider this option of early conciliation. Most potential claimants will not be able to proceed to tribunal without at least considering this option. And the aim of this process is to arrive at a resolution to the dispute that both parties can agree to without the stress and cost of going to tribunal. Where parties do not wish to try conciliation or where it does not bring an agreed resolution, we will then issue a certificate that the employee will need if they're proceeding to lodge a tribunal claim. Early conciliation can be employee-led and it can also be employer-led. So for example, if an employer makes contact with us, we would refer to that as the non-ET process. And again, we can facilitate a legally binding settlement between the employer and the employee. It's just important to note that for employee-led referrals only, the tribunal time limit is paused for 1 calendar month to allow early conciliation to take place. And this doesn't happen with employer-led. So your time limits are put on pause if you're in early conciliation through an employee-led notification. Individual conciliation then, if someone has lodged a claim at the tribunal about their employment rights, a copy is then sent to the Labour Relations Agency by the tribunal. We have a legal duty then to offer conciliation in most cases. A conciliation officer tries to assist both sides finding an acceptable solution instead of going to a tribunal. They don't impose solutions, but will try to help settle differences on the parties' terms. Trade unions can represent in both early and individual conciliation notifications or claims. And then collective conciliation is facilitated through assisted negotiations where the LRA helps employers and employees, usually through the trade union, to try to reach acceptable settlements in relation to a collective dispute. Arbitration then, so the statutory arbitration scheme, for those who have submitted a tribunal claim, they will be offered access to the LRA's arbitration scheme, and this offers a quick, non-legalistic, less formal, confidential and more cost-effective alternative to a tribunal. The claim is heard by an independent arbitrator under the LRA arbitration scheme. Arbitrators have the authority to make the same legally binding awards as tribunal judges, but the outcomes of hearings are not published, they're confidential. There's no cross-examination of witnesses or swearing on oaths, and the trade union representative can represent it at arbitration. The agency also facilitates a range of independent appeals, mainly grievance, bullying, harassment and discipline, for example, where the final stage of an organisation's procedure offers the option of an independent appeal of the decision via the LRA. And independent appeals are considered procedural arbitrations. The appeal service is available to education, libraries, local government, voluntary organisations and other public services and bodies in accordance with policies and procedures agreed between employers and trade unions. And there's also industrial arbitration as well, just mentioned that, which is available for collective disputes when all collective conciliation attempts have been exhausted. All our services are offered on an impartial, confidential, voluntary, independent and free basis. We've included a brief slide here on dealing with bullying and harassment in the workplace because this can be a big part of any conflict. Responsibility rests with each employer to provide and promote a good and harmonious working environment. And this means an environment where all workers are treated with dignity and respect. And where no worker is subjected to bullying and harassment. The starting point for dealing with dealing practically with bullying harassment is policy development, and it's important to have a policy or procedure in place which provides a framework for dealing with matters. It is really crucial for effective workplace relations that trade unions are involved in the development and implementation of all policies. This ensures trade unions can effectively advise their members on both standards of behaviour expected and respond appropriately when procedures are not followed. The bullying harassment procedure should be the first reference point if a member approaches you with a complaint. It should be the first point of reference for a line manager when confronted with a potential complaint. And be mindful, you're also employees, so you should be familiar with your company's policy if you are personally experiencing bullying harassment and unsure what to do. Okay, the next few slides, we're just looking at conflict, I suppose, through the lens of the pandemic. And we just thought we would consider two elements that may raise conflict at work. The first one being returning to office working. This is now a hot topic in an organisation whose employees have been working from home, and hybrid working arrangements are being reviewed by employers to allow employees to have a mixture of working from home and working in the office. As trade union representatives, it's highly likely you're encountering this sort of dilemma already and have no doubt dealing with working from home or hybrid issues. We just say that we have hybrid guidance available on our LRA website, which is a useful document, and it has a very useful FAQ at the end, which deals with a lot of common issues, common questions that are being raised about this. Organisations need to acknowledge they will not be able to please everyone when it comes to this issue, and there will be difficult conversations where the business needs require people to work in ways that they would not choose. Some people have relished working from home while others cannot wait to get back to the office or site. Some individuals will inevitably be looking at things from their own perspective rather than that of the organisation they work for, so the potential for conflict is increased. Meaningful consultation and discussion with both the individuals and trade unions will limit the potential for conflict. Difficulties will occur if organisations are unable to address such challenges. However difficult it may appear, it is essential that these individual and trade union conversations take place. A broad brush approach to the issue of where people are going to work will not help organisations or the workforce address future challenges. And then in terms of the COVID vaccine, some employers may need to face controversial issues regarding vaccinated and unvaccinated employees. The increasingly politicised nature of vaccines and mask wearing may lead to conflicts between employees and increased workplace tensions. We're starting to see some interesting cases like this come through the tribunals. For example, employees may assume that others have not been vaccinated and treat employees who have not been vaccinated as unsafe. Employees may see other employees' social media comments as adverse to vaccinations, but refuse to wear a mask in the workplace. In each instance, employers may want to be proactive to guard against employee bullying based on disabilities, religion, or even politics as they relate to vaccinations or why someone may be unvaccinated. Focusing on safety and respect may help employers prevent conflicts from happening and keep them from escalating in the workplace. Requiring face masks in the workplace may be a legitimate safety policy, and permitting exemptions to the safety policy for fully vaccinated employees who may need an accommodation may continue to be good policy so long as doing so maintains a safe workplace. A culture of respect in the workplace means employees respect their co-workers' choices, even if they do not agree with them, and that employees should follow the employer's safety policies to protect themselves and their co-workers. Okay, so just by way of a recap on what we've covered, so we've recognised the causes of conflict at work, as well as how we react to conflict and what our conflict management style is. We've explored the cost of conflict, noting savings can be made if conflict is dealt with at an early stage, and we have considered the positive side to conflict. We've outlined the manager and trade union's responsibility in managing conflict. and we've looked at ways conflict can be prevented or minimised, as well as considering early intervention and informal resolution in terms of diffusing volatile situation. We've mentioned some techniques and skills that you can use in a conflict situation, and we've also explained what happens if a dispute goes down the formal route and how the Labour Relations Agency can help. So that concludes our presentation, our webinar.